Hey guys, Andrew at BTO Range here in Conroe, Texas. Today on the bench we've got a Remington 870. This is a 870 Express Magnum. A lot of folks have been asking for us to do something on the 870. So this one came in to the repair shop. Really simple repair, but we're going to go ahead and take it apart a little bit further to show you what to look for and some things that can go wrong with this model. So we'll also do a more in-depth video on the history of the Remington 870 when we get a good candidate for that in the front of the store. But let's start with this pump shotgun. They date back to the 50s, and the mechanism, other than what some of the materials, what some of this stuff is made out of, from aluminum to plastic, things like that, they're relatively unchanged theory-wise, but there have been some minor design changes in the gun over its years of production and still in production today. So this particular 870 came in, the customer does not like the way the magazine follower, and the polymer magazine followers in these guns tend to come apart and have some issues. So we're going to replace that. We're going to replace the magazine spring on this gun, but let's take it apart and take a look at some of the other things that can go wrong with it that require a little bit more attention sometimes. So first things first, we're going to unlock the action. We're going to reach in here, make sure it's clear. When you pull the magazine cap off of an 870, particularly an older one, be cautious because the customer may, or the owner may have lost the magazine spring retainer plug that goes in the front of this. And if that's the case, then the spring's just going to come out the front. So not the case on this gun. We're in good shape there. With the action halfway back, we can remove the barrel and set it off to the side. This is a 28-inch barrel with rim chokes. We're not going to try to pull the rim choke out. A lot of times those are stuck, and we have to get pretty aggressive on those. To pull this magazine spring out, there are two different types of magazine cap retainers that were used on the 870. The older ones have just a spring steel cap that fits inside the end of the magazine tube. It's held in place by friction, and you have to reach in there and compress those two halves together, bring that magazine spring retainer out, then the mag spring and follower will come out the front. This particular model is newer style. It's got a plastic retainer with grooves in it, and these grooves correspond to these indentations here on the mag tube. So when this goes in, you compress it in far past this, turn it until it can't come back out, and that's what retains that magazine spring in the gun. So that does present a little bit of an issue if you were to put attempt to put a magazine tube extension on the gun. A lot of times we have to go in and either remove this dent. We can swage those out. There's a few different ways to do that. So we can pull the magazine spring. This is the removable plug, so you can be game warden friendly. And now also, this magazine follower also has grooves in it to correspond with these dents also. So this one, it's been around a minute. We haven't dated this gun yet, so I'm not sure how old it is. It's not terribly old, but the customer wants that changed. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in an aluminum magazine follower. We've got it on the way in. We're out of stock on them right now. They're available in a bunch of different colors: green, silver, red, orange, a few different colors. So we're going to replace that with the aluminum magazine follower so we don't have the degradation issue. And we're going to replace this spring with an extra power magazine spring as well. So that's something. This is a spring that does need to be replaced on occasion because they're relatively light construction and they will take a set. Now, you may have to fit the spring depending on what spring you get. The springs are different lengths depending on how long the magazine tube of the shotgun is. So a magazine tube that has an extension on it requires a longer spring, and the spring needs to have some kind of compression once it's installed. So that's those components. And now we're going to go ahead and remove some of the rest of the gun. So to remove this let's remove the trigger group first. I don't have a block here. So the trigger, trigger group is retained by these two cross pins. We're just going to tap them out. The two cross pins are different diameters, so they do not interchange. But the same size pins are used in all ages of the 870. And they are different as to gauge. The small frame 870s are the same diameter, they're just shorter because the frame is not quite as wide. So they do change with the gauge. Trigger group just pulls out. We'll get back to that guy in a minute. To remove the bolt, or to remove the Forend assembly, I reached in and I compressed the shell stop on the left side of the gun, the left shell stop. That allows me to remove the Forend and the action bar forward. The bolt and slide sit on that just like that when it's in the gun. So once it clears the receiver, these are just free to come out, and they sit just like that. I'll set this aside for a second. There are some things we're going to talk about on the receiver in just a minute, so let's continue talking about what we have here. So in the bolt, we have the locking block. This unit right here, this is what locks into a corresponding recess in the top of the receiver to lock the bolt closed when it's being fired. And then we have the firing pin and spring underneath, and we have the extractor. So there are some things to look at on this gun when you're evaluating a used 870. We want to make sure that spring, and you can see the spring running right here. Now what that spring does is it acts as a retractor. So after you fire the gun and then you're moving the bolt to the rear, it pushes, this spring is going to push the firing pin back through the back portion of the bolt so that the hammer can connect it. Without that spring, it would be sitting flush, or maybe even below flush. See, when I push it flush, we still don't have firing pin protrusion through the breech face. So without that spring in there, you'd have the firing pin hitting the back of the bolt, not necessarily the firing pin, so you would not get the gun to discharge without that particular spring in place. This firing pin can break in here. It's not a very common thing, but it can break. So we want to make sure that when we have the bolt out, that we actually push this firing pin all the way through so that we make sure that we have good firing pin protrusion, that we don't have a jagged tip here. So if we were to remove that, the firing pin is held in place by this pin right here. We would just defeat this pin out through the bottom, and this would be able to remove the firing pin and the associated firing pin spring, and then the locking block. So the extractor is another, and the correct way to say it is a common fail point, but that doesn't mean that they fail all the time. It just means that this is a part that wears and occasionally has to be replaced, is this extractor. And the extractor hasn't changed. The extractor nowadays is a metal injected molded part like this one here. They used to be forged and machined some time ago. So it's held in place by this plunger and then a spring that runs behind the plunger back here. So to remove it, you would put a small flat blade screwdriver in here to lever that plunger backward and remove the extractor out of the side of the bolt. So we want to make sure on this extractor that we have a good sharp claw right here. This claw is what engages the rim of the shotgun shell to pull either fired cases or unfired shells out of the chamber when you operate the action. So when the gun closes, the shotgun shell kind of feeds up behind here, but it also has the ability, we're spring loaded here, so it can pop into place over the rim of the cartridge of the shotgun shell rim with that spring loaded feature there. So we want to make sure that we have good spring tension on here. We want to make sure that our claw is nice and sharp. We want to make sure we keep the breech face clean, that we don't have any burrs or anything on the hole through the breech face, and that we have good firing pin protrusion. So we're pretty happy with the bolt in general. So we'll set that off to the side. On this Forend iron is held in place And see, this one was kind of loose. It really shouldn't be this loose where I can just turn it like this. We shouldn't be that loose. So we could turn that out, and then the Forend iron would, or the action slide is what I'm trying to say. The action slide would come out of this, and we could replace the Forend that way. So this really should be nice and snug. And there's a tool that reaches in. There are two notches here. Tool reaches in, engages those notches, and tightens it up. You can also do it with just a flat piece of metal, wide enough to span this, chuck that piece of metal up in the vise, and you can just twist it that way to turn it on. There's a bunch of different ways to do it, but the bottom line is this does need to be, you don't really have to come down on it with a lot of force. It just needs to be a little better than hand tight, so we don't have a whole lot of wobble on this forend. So we're good there. We want to make sure we don't have any cracks or breaks in here. I haven't seen one of these crack on the manually operated shotguns. We do see this happen on like Weatherby semi-auto shotguns, particularly the ones from the 70s. We see this crack here, and we have been successful at micro welding these back together on those shotguns because the parts are unobtainable. But this one, it's unusual to see it on a the slide actuated manually operated shotgun, simply because there's not as much energy being applied to it during operation. So there are a couple of significant things that go on with this receiver that we need to talk about. Number one is going to be this piece right here. This is the ejector housing, and pinned to that and riveted to that is the ejector, this spring-loaded ejector that's right here in the center of that housing. So this is riveted through, and you probably can't see the rivets, but there are two rivets here in the side of the receiver, which is the back end of what you're seeing right here. And there's another one hidden underneath this spring here. This little area right here, this little part of the ejector housing that juts out toward the front, that's what indexes this barrel in the receiver. So when we put the barrel back in, we can see right here how this indexes into the barrel extension on this shotgun. So this does break, or it can break. And the reason it would break is people don't adequately secure the barrel to the gun when it's shot, and there's excess movement there. And it breaks off this tip of the ejector housing. And the way you can tell that's happened is when the gun is assembled, you get movement here. You can actually twist the barrel like that. And that would be an indication that that's broken. And of course, you can just move the slide back and look in there and see that ejector housing is broken. The other thing that can happen is this ejector itself, the spring, can break. That is a much easier fix than the ejector housing. Let's move this back out of the way. Should the ejector spring break, the only thing that's holding this ejector spring in is this rivet here. This is a 2-diameter rivet going through this ejector housing. It's coming through the back side of here. So it's riveted in 2 places, so it's a stepped rivet. So on the first step, it's what's riveted the tip of the ejector housing to the side of the receiver. And then there's a smaller diameter, this rivet right here, this riveted section right here, is what's holding this ejector spring into place. So if this housing breaks occasionally, or if this ejector itself breaks rather, occasionally we are able to remove away just this riveted section, put in a new ejector spring, and then re-rivet it in place if we're lucky, if there's enough metal left on this rivet. If there's not, or if we have to replace the ejector housing itself because this is broken, we have to and remember there's a rivet underneath here too that only rivets the back part of that housing in place. We have to take those rivets out, and when we take those rivets out, they're going to come out the side here, and they're going to leave 2 holes. Now you can't see them very well, On camera, or even here, you know, without looking through a camera, just looking at it with our eyes, you don't see them that well because that all is done, and the receiver is made flat again before the finish. The finish is applied over the steel rivet. So that's major surgery. Anything having to do with the ejector on an 870, this ejector housing particularly, is major surgery. The way to fix it is the rivets are available. They are available. It is not a DIY thing typically. We have to fit the rivets to the holes in the receiver to make sure that they're flush. They're going to come slightly larger than the holes, so we have to fit them down to the holes in the individual receiver, fit those flush, and then go in with special riveting tools and rivet the body of the receiver in, then put the spring in, and then do this secondary rivet to hold this ejector spring. Once that happens, then we have to come back on this side of the receiver, make it flat, and then typically we would media blast the receiver and Cerakote it back to black. So you're talking about not only the repair costs of fixing the ejector housing itself, but also in refinishing the receiver. And we would typically do that with a matte black Cerakote. So that's expensive. To get all this done is well over $200 at just about any shop that I can think of. So you have to take that into consideration if you're looking at a used 870 with one of those problems, that you factor the repair cost into what you're going to pay for the gun. So the other thing that can happen with the 870 is a much easier fix with the inside of the receiver, and we'll insert a still picture so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm going to try to hold it up here, but there's a shell stop that runs along this side of the receiver, and you can see the end of it. You can see the end of it flexing there, right here. You can see the end of it flexing. Now there's no spring underneath that. The actual shell stop itself is tempered and acts as its own spring. But in order for that to work, it's staked into the receiver here in 3 spots, 1, 2, and 3. And it's staked on the back side, or on the top of this slot in the receiver where it's sitting. It's staked in there as well. So over time, those will pop loose. When it pops loose, it's going to cause feeding issues. It can cause issues with getting the shell onto the carrier. I mean, there's a lot of different things that will start being a problem with the gun when that happens. So fortunately, that's something that we can fix fairly easily. The way we do it here in our shop is we will, if we need to, we'll take down the sides of the receiver, the shell stop really, the sides of the shell stop and the receiver, to make sure that there are no burrs. We'll put this back in place, and then we'll use our small diameter pin, and we'll put that in, because we'll put that in the receiver like that, because that also goes through the shell stop, so that that's going to locate our shell stop in place. The end of the shell stop goes into its recess in the receiver on the outside of the mag tube. That little shelf is what holds on, is what blocks the shell from coming out, and that's compressed by this action bar when the action bar is moved rearward to allow the shell to come out. So we put this end in place. We locate it with this trigger guard pin, and then we will compress this into the receiver, and then we'll reach in and we'll stake. There's a special tool that fits in and down, and we can restake the shell stop into the receiver at that point. That happens on Remington 870s. It happens on any of the Remington products that have a staked shell stop. So that'd be the Remington 870, the 878, the 1100, the 1187, the 1148. I mean, any of those that have that staked shell stop, it can certainly happen to. So that's not a big deal. That's not an expensive repair. It's around $45 for us to do all that. That's pretty easy. The ejector's a big deal, and a lot of times, for a lot of people, that's a kind of a fatal thing on the 870. So let's move him back out to the side. This is a rather a rather dirty trigger group on this newer 870. The earlier guns, like the early 70s guns and before, this will be one piece, not vented, won't have this tab here, and it'll be silver in color. And then this will be aluminum. On the older guns, this is polymer. This trigger guard housing is polymer on the later and current guns. There's not a whole ton that goes wrong here, except for this particular guy. Now on the 1100 is a different, there are some common parts between the 870 and 1100, but the 1100 being semi-auto has a disconnector that goes in there. There's a few other things that happen that can go wrong on the 1100, but one of the very common things that we see is this metal clip. There's a little metal half clip that lives right here on this cross pin, and that just limits this pin from going away or from going through. Usually there's another one on this side, and it's missing, so it's not going to come apart while it's in the receiver, obviously. So we want to make sure that this isn't bent. We want to make sure it's straight. What this guy does is a slide lock. It's going to come up behind the action slide when the gun is closed, and it's going to lock that action slide in the forward position when the gun is cocked. So when you pull the trigger on this gun, when the trigger comes forward, the hammer spring is underneath that hammer plunger, actually bears against this part of the action slide lock and pushes that down. So that's why when you fire the 870, bang, then you can actually, you don't have to manipulate any buttons to bring the action slide back because this is out of the way. When the action's cocked, the trigger, the spring here helps push this down, and that brings our lock back up into position so that the action is locked when the gun is cocked. So to unlock the action when the gun is cocked, you manually push up that lever right there. That brings the action slide lock out of the way to allow that to come back. So if this is bent in, it can ride past. If this is not straight, it'll ride past the corresponding part of the action bar that it's blocking, and it would allow you to unlock the gun when the gun is cocked without having to manipulate it. So that would have to be. We've had some luck straightening these in the past. Many times you have to replace it, and it's a bit problematic because this is kind of staked in place on this side. So if we can straighten it, we will. And then with wear, when this part wears, we have to replace it so that the gun locks like it's supposed to. So this, another wear point on the 870 is the carrier dog, which is this guy here. And this is what, when the action's operated, that's what makes the carrier lift. So there's a spring and a plunger underneath here. So general cleaning is all it takes. The only time that we have to really replace this is if we have a gun that's not feeding up like it should. Most of the time that's not the problem, the carrier's the problem. And typically if this is bent, and we've seen that occur fairly often, we'll just replace the entire carrier assembly, which is available with this carrier dog. The carrier dog is staked to this part, so we'll just replace that entire assembly because it's actually cheaper to replace the entire assembly than pay for the labor of restaking a new carrier dog to an old assembly. So it makes sense to do that. The safety on these things, over the years, there have been reversible safeties. There have been safeties with a larger head. Now take a look at what's going on with this safety. That's what's called the J-lock. So for a period of time, Remington had a device that would actually lock this trigger plate, and they used it on the 870 and the 1100, and it came with the gun came with 2 polymer keys that fit into this, and you could turn it and lock it and then unlock it. So obviously what happened is people would lock it, lose the key, and then their gun is useless. But they're not, those keys are not unique to individual guns. So this J-lock key would fit somebody else's J-lock key, and so forth and so on. And that can be replaced. That can be taken out and replaced with a standard safety to get rid of the J-lock. So a lot of people do that on their 870 and 1100 guns. That way you don't go to a hunt somewhere and then you find out, oh, somehow my gun is locked, I can't use it. And then nobody in your party has a J-lock key. So we replaced a bunch of them with non-J-lock safeties. That's a pretty popular modification. They no longer have this. The current 870s don't J-lock anymore, and the older 870s don't J-lock. So there was a period of time, and I don't recall exactly what those years were. I probably should have looked that up, but there was a time when they did that J-lock, and it doesn't hurt the gun to have the J-lock in there, but a lot of people change them out. And they put them on the side of the bolt shroud on Remington 700s for a while as well, and we replace those with non-J-lock shrouds. But then you also have to replace the striker, and there's a lot more going on the 700 when we start doing that. So putting this guy back together is exactly the opposite of what we did just a second ago. We're going to set the bolt on top of the action slide, and you can see that as that action slide is moved forward, right? So you're moving everything forward in the gun this way, and as that action slide moves all the way forward, this shelf right here forces this locking block up into the top of the receiver, and that's how the gun locks into place. So we're going to set that, and it just sets right here on top of there. So it can be kind of fiddly balancing that while you put it all back together. So what I like to do is go ahead and feed this right about where it needs to be. Set it in place, and then I'm going to have to reach in and defeat these 2 shell stops to allow that to slide past them and get them in place. So notice I can't move it. Notice I can't move it forward out of the receiver because it's hitting those shell stops, and that's what we want to see. So to put this guy back in, it's assembled. For basic cleaning, you don't really need to take it apart. You can just about get to everything in here, either with an ultrasonic cleaner or even with the good old toothbrush and solvent. You really don't need to take that apart. If anybody wants us to take one of these apart, we'll do a video just on this guy here because there are some tips and tricks. So it just drops into place. Sometimes you have to kind of edge it in. I should have turned that off, shouldn't I? You have to move that forward, and you have to kind of edge it into place until it kind of rotates into place with that action slide lock arm on the side of the receiver behind that action slide. And then remember, these are two different sizes. And sometimes you have to wiggle this around just a little bit to get it to go in there. There we go. Just a couple of little taps. Now those are held in place. These pins are held in place by those little half clips I showed you that people lose. So if you don't have the half clips in there, at least one on each side, this pin could walk out. And if your luck's like mine, that's going to happen when you're wader deep in the duck blind. So we can go ahead and we'll put this back in there because we're waiting on a couple of parts to come in. So we have to line the slot up, and then we're going to turn it so that it won't come back out. We're going to run our plug back in there, and this one's a lot easier to put in than the older style. The older style, we would have to put the spring tension clip on there, squeeze it together, and kind of tap it in place where it's held by a friction fit on the inside of this mag tube. But this is a little bit easier. It's going to fit in just like that. We're going to line the slot up so that it'll go into place, and then we're just going to turn it just a little bit so now it's held in place. We're going to set our action up to where we can. Now there's no gas port or anything. On the 1100 there are either 1 or 2 gas ports in this barrel ring that need to be cleaned, but not the case on the 1100 on a manual operated gun. And then this guy's just held in place here. Now, contrary to popular belief, you don't need to put a tool on this to hold it, to put a lot of tension on it. We just need it to be good and snug. Now we're going to function test it. That's locked. Depressing that action lock. And we see that carrier come up. As we move the action side forward, we see the carrier come up so that it would feed a shell. The gun resets correctly. And then we have nothing with the safety in the fire position. So we passed all function tests. And again, there's nothing mechanically wrong with this gun so much as the customer wanted a new magazine follower and a spring in there, which is probably a good idea. So we're going to replace that. So that's basically what to look for when you're buying a used Remington 870. Some of the things that can be expensive to repair. Most of the stuff on an 870 is not expensive at all, except for that whole ejector problem. That can be an issue. So, we appreciate you watching. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you like what we're doing. Shoot us a comment. Let us know if there's something that you want us to take a look at, and we'll do our best to find it for you and get it on the table. And have a good day.